In the vast world of Norse mythology, few objects command as much awe as Mjölnir, the hammer of the thunder god Thor. Regarded as one of the most powerful weapons in the Nine Realms, Mjölnir was the ultimate symbol of divine protection, capable of vanquishing giants and summoning the fury of the storm. Its creation is a fantastic story born from a cruel prank, a desperate promise, and a legendary contest between master craftsmen. The tale reveals how an act of chaos led to the forging of Asgard's greatest defense. Welcome to Everything Mythology, where we tell the most epic mythology stories. Today, we'll be going deep into how Thor's mighty hammer, Mjölnir, was created. Our story begins with the malicious shearing of Sif's golden hair. For those who don't know, Sif was Thor's wife. She was a goddess of the earth, embodying fertility and the abundance of the harvest. Her most renowned feature, celebrated in song and saga, was her magnificent hair. It was a cascade of pure, living gold, so radiant that it was said to rival the sun itself. When she walked through the fields, her hair seemed to whisper to the grain, encouraging it to grow tall and golden. It flowed down her back in a shimmering waterfall, each strand a thread of spun sunlight that captured the essence of warmth and life. Her hair was a symbol of her divinity, a testament to her connection with the fertile earth, and a source of immense pride for her husband Thor, who saw in it the beauty and vitality of the world he was sworn to protect. It was a perfect feature in a perfect world, a beacon of Asgard's splendor. This very perfection, however, was a source of irritation for Loki, the trickster god. A giant by birth but a blood brother to Odin, Loki walked a fine line between the Aesir and the forces of chaos. His mind was a labyrinth of envy, boredom, and a relentless desire to stir turmoil. The serene order of Asgard felt like a cage to his restless spirit. He watched the other gods, content in their power and glory, and felt a familiar, gnawing resentment. He saw the adoration in Thor's eyes whenever he looked upon Sif's golden locks, and a venomous envy coiled in his heart. For Loki, beauty existed to be marred, and harmony was a silence begging to be shattered. He craved the thrill of disruption, the satisfying crunch of order collapsing under the weight of a single, well-placed act of mischief. His gaze fell upon Sif's hair as the ultimate symbol of this idyllic world he so despised. It was too perfect, too beloved. An idea, sharp and wicked, began to form in his mind. He envisioned the shock, the outrage, the chaos that would erupt if that perfect golden cascade were to disappear. The thought sent a thrill of malicious delight through him. He began to watch Sif, studying her habits, waiting for the perfect moment to execute his plan. He was a shadow moving through the golden halls, his thoughts a stark contrast to the brilliant light that surrounded him. His prank would be an act of pure malice, born from a festering need to see the world burn, even if just for a moment. The opportunity presented itself on a warm, quiet afternoon. Thor was away from Asgard, journeying in the east to battle the giants that perpetually threatened the borders of the realms. Asgard was peaceful, lulled into a sense of security. Sif, feeling the warmth of the day, lay down to rest in a secluded meadow within the palace grounds, her guard down in the tranquil safety of her home. Her golden hair was spread out around her like a halo, catching the afternoon sun and turning the grass around her into a field of light. She drifted into a deep, untroubled sleep, the picture of serene beauty. This was the moment Loki had been waiting for. With the silence and stealth of a predator, he approached her sleeping form. In his hand, he clutched a pair of shears, the cold iron a stark contrast to the warmth of the day. He moved without a sound, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and the faint, thrilling whisper of fear. He knelt beside her, his breath held tight in his chest. For a moment, he paused, admiring the sheer artistry of his impending crime. He reached out and touched a single golden lock, feeling its silken texture. Then, with a flicker of a grin, he began his work. The shears snipped, a crisp, metallic sound that was shockingly loud in the quiet meadow. The first lock of golden hair fell, its light instantly dimming as it separated from her head. Loki worked quickly, his movements merciless. Great handfuls of the radiant hair fell to the ground, piling up around her like discarded treasure. He cut it all, right down to the scalp, leaving her head bare and exposed. The act was a violation, a desecration of beauty. When he was finished, he stood back to admire his handiwork. Where a river of sunlight had once flowed, there was now nothing. The shorn locks lay on the grass, their magic already fading, looking like sad, wilted flowers. A surge of triumphant glee coursed through Loki. He had done it. He had shattered the perfect image. Without a backward glance, he gathered some of the shorn hair, a trophy of his malevolence, and vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving Sif to her slumber. The awakening was slow and gentle at first. Sif stirred, feeling a strange coolness on her neck and scalp. She reached up a hand to brush her hair from her face, a movement as natural to her as breathing. Her fingers met smooth, bare skin. Confusion flickered in her mind, still hazy with sleep. She sat up, and her eyes fell upon the piles of shorn gold lying on the grass around her. The light had gone out of them. They were just hair now, lifeless and dull. A wave of cold horror washed over her. She scrambled to her feet, her hands flying to her head, frantically searching for the familiar weight of her glorious mane. There was nothing. A gasp escaped her lips, followed by a raw, guttural cry of pure anguish that tore through the tranquility of Asgard. It was a sound of profound loss and violation. Gods and goddesses came running from the palace, drawn by the heart-wrenching sound. They found her in the meadow, on her knees amidst the ruins of her golden hair, her body racked with sobs. Her head, once her crown of glory, was now a source of deep shame and devastation. The gods stood in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Who could have committed such a cruel and senseless act in the heart of Asgard? The initial shock quickly gave way to a rising tide of outrage. This was an attack on one of their own, an unforgivable insult. Thor's return to Asgard was one of contentment. He had been journeying in the eastern lands, a necessary and frequent endeavor where he clashed with the frost giants of Jotunheim, the eternal enemies of the Aesir. His battles were successful, pushing back the forces of chaos and securing the borders of the god's domain. His heart was light, filled with the satisfaction of a protector's duty fulfilled, and he eagerly anticipated his homecoming. The thought of his hall, Mjölnir, and the sight of his wife, Sif, was a powerful pull, a warm beacon after the cold, harsh landscapes of the giant lands. He crossed the shimmering Bifrost Bridge with no inkling of the violation that had occurred in his absence. The realm appeared as it always did, a bastion of golden light and serene power, its spires reaching into the clear heavens. He entered the city gates, offering boisterous greetings to the guards and other gods he passed. He noted a certain tension in their replies, a hesitancy in their eyes that they tried to conceal behind forced smiles. He dismissed it as the usual solemnity that could fall upon Asgard, a place that carried the weight of the 9 realms upon its shoulders. He strode through the grand avenues, his mind on the simple pleasures of home, a horn of mead, a roaring fire, and the sight of Sif's magnificent golden hair, which to him was more beautiful than any sunrise. He imagined it spread across her shoulders, a cascade of living sunlight that represented all the fertility and life he fought to defend. Upon reaching Mjölnir, the largest of all dwellings in Asgard, a sense of unease finally settled upon him. The great hall was silent. Normally it would be filled with the sounds of life, servants bustling, Sif humming a tune as she worked her loom, but now an unnatural quiet hung in the air. He called her name, his voice echoing in the vast space. There was no reply. A knot of concern tightened in his gut. He moved deeper into their home, his footsteps loud on the stone floors. He found her in their private chambers, huddled in a far corner away from the light of the windows. A heavy, dark cloak was drawn tightly around her, obscuring her from head to toe. Her shoulders trembled with sobs she was trying to suppress. Thor's heart sank. He rushed to her side, his mind racing through 100 terrible possibilities. Had she fallen ill? Had she received dire news? Sif, he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble as he knelt before her. What is it? What has happened? She refused to look at him, keeping her face buried in the folds of the cloak. He reached out a hand, his touch infinitely tender, and placed it on her shoulder. My love, speak to me. Slowly, as if it took all the strength she possessed, she lifted her head. Her eyes, swollen and red from weeping, met his. Then, with a shaking hand, she let the hood of the cloak fall back. Thor stared. For a moment, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Where her glorious, sun-bright hair should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin. Her head had been completely shorn, stripped bare in a cruel and grotesque act of violation. The sight was so shocking, so fundamentally wrong that he could not speak. It was as if the sun had been stolen from the sky. The symbol of her vitality, her beauty, and his deep, abiding love for her was gone, replaced by a raw, naked emblem of shame. Seeing her so diminished, so utterly devastated, broke something within him. The protector in him, the husband, rose up like a tidal wave of righteous anger. He tried to comfort her, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he touched her cheek, but his words were choked with the rage that was building inside him. A single tear of her grief was a greater provocation than any army of giants. A deep, cold stillness washed over him. He saw the depth of her pain in her eyes, the humiliation that burned deeper than any physical wound. His gaze fell to the floor, where a few stray golden strands lay like dead things, their light extinguished. Then the stillness shattered. A low growl began deep in his chest, a sound of pure animalistic rage. It grew in volume until it erupted from his throat in a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of Mjölnir. The sound was one of utter fury and profound grief, a promise of terrible retribution. Outside, the clear Asgardian sky instantly darkened, as if night had fallen. Thick, black clouds boiled into existence, and a jagged fork of lightning tore through the sky, its accompanying thunderclap a direct answer to his rage. Loki, the name was spoken like a thunderclap, a curse, a sentence of death all in one. Thor needed no proof, no witness. There was only one being in all the 9 worlds with a spirit so twisted, a heart so filled with malice and envy, that they would commit such a vile and personal act for the sheer sport of it. The prank bore Loki's signature as clearly as if he had carved his name on Sif's bare skin. He turned from the garden and began his hunt. He moved with a terrifying speed, a blur of muscle and rage. The gods scrambled out of his path, their faces pale with awe and fear. They knew what was coming. Thor was not on his way to issue a warning or to demand an explanation. He was on his way to commit murder. Loki, for his part, had grossly miscalculated. He had expected Thor's anger, had even looked forward to it, but he had not anticipated the sheer primal violence of this reaction. He felt the tremors in the earth and heard his name screamed with such venom that his blood ran cold. The smug satisfaction he had felt was instantly replaced by a stark animal terror. He began to run, but there was nowhere in Asgard to hide. Thor cornered him in the great feasting hall of Valhalla. Loki had been attempting to blend in, to lose himself in the crowd of assembled deities and slain warriors. It was a futile effort. Thor strode into the hall, and the boisterous chamber fell utterly silent. Every eye turned to him, and then to the pale, trembling figure of Loki. Thor did not waste a moment. He crossed the vast hall in a few massive strides. Loki tried to conjure a witty remark, a clever lie, but the words died in his throat as Thor's huge hand shot out and clamped around his neck. With a single, effortless motion, Thor lifted the trickster clean off his feet, his fingers digging into Loki's flesh like iron talons. Loki dangled helplessly, his feet kicking uselessly in the air, his hands clawing at the unyielding arm that held him. "You," Thor growled, his voice low and guttural, a terrifying counterpoint to the raging storm outside. He pulled Loki close, their faces inches apart. Loki could see the lightning reflected in Thor's eyes, could feel the heat of his rage radiating off him in waves. "You did this. You dared to lay a hand on my wife. You dared to bring this shame upon my house." Loki's face began to turn purple as he fought for air. He tried to speak, to beg, to bargain, but only choked, gurgling sounds escaped his lips. The fear of imminent, violent death was a cold hand squeezing his heart. "I am going to break every single bone in your miserable body," Thor hissed, his voice a deadly promise. "I will snap your spine. I will crush your skull. I will make you suffer for an eternity before I finally grant you the mercy of death. You will regret the day you were ever born." He shook Loki violently, like a dog shaking a rat, and slammed him against a thick stone pillar. The pillar cracked under the impact, and a gasp went through the assembled gods. This was it. Loki was going to die. Pinned against the stone, with the life being squeezed out of him, his mind, sharpened by absolute terror, finally found a way out. It was a desperate, last-ditch gamble. "Wait," he managed to rasp, the word a ragged, strangled plea. "I can fix it." Thor paused. His grip did not loosen, but the inexorable pressure eased just enough for Loki to suck in a desperate breath of air. "What did you say?" Thor's voice was dangerously quiet. "I can fix it," Loki repeated, his voice trembling but gaining a fraction of strength. "I can restore her hair. I swear it." He saw a flicker of something in Thor's eyes, not mercy, but a sliver of hesitation. He pressed his advantage. "Let me go to Svartalfheim, the world below. The dwarves, the sons of Ivaldi, they are master smiths. They can forge anything. They can spin new hair from pure gold, hair that will attach to her scalp and grow as if it were her own. It will be more beautiful, more radiant than what she lost. I swear it on my own life." The hall remained silent, every god watching the tense standoff. The idea was audacious, almost blasphemous. To replace a goddess's natural feature with a crafted object was unheard of. But Sif's devastation was absolute, and perhaps even a magical artifice was better than the shame she now endured. Thor stared at Loki, his mind a battlefield of conflicting impulses. His entire being screamed for vengeance, for the simple, satisfying act of crushing the life out of this creature who had hurt his family. Yet the promise Loki made was a potent one. The restoration of Sif's honor was the ultimate goal. Killing Loki would bring him satisfaction, but it would leave Sif's wound unhealed. Slowly, deliberately, Thor's fingers uncurled from Loki's throat. He let him drop to the floor in a heap. Loki lay there, gasping for air, his neck bruised and raw, not daring to move. Thor loomed over him, a mountain of contained fury. "You will go to the dwarves," he commanded, each word a block of granite. "You will bring back this golden hair you speak of. It will be, as you said, more beautiful than before, and you will do it quickly." He then knelt, grabbing a handful of Loki's tunic and hauling him close once more. The whisper that followed was more terrifying than his earlier shouts. "But hear this oath, trickster. If you fail, if you return empty-handed, or if the gift is anything less than perfect, your life is forfeit. There will be no more bargains. There will be no escape. I will hunt you across all 9 worlds, and I will tear you apart with my bare hands. Swear to me now that you will succeed." Looking into the thunder god's eyes, Loki saw the absolute certainty of his own destruction if he failed. All his usual bravado was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. "I swear," he choked out, his voice hoarse. "I swear it, on all that is sacred, I will restore her hair." Thor held his gaze for a long moment, then shoved him away. "Go," he commanded, "and do not show your face in Asgard again until you have made good on your vow." Loki scrambled to his feet and without a backward glance fled from the hall. He ran as if the hounds of hell were at his heels, his mind already spinning with the impossible task ahead. Thor watched him go, his rage not gone but banked, channeled into a singular, unwavering purpose. He turned and left the hall, the storm outside beginning to subside, mirroring the quiet, deadly resolve that had now settled over him. The bargain had been struck. The fate of Loki and the creation of legends now rested in the dark forges of the dwarves. Loki fled Asgard with a speed born of pure terror. The phantom sensation of Thor's fingers crushing his throat was a far more potent motivator than any threat of exile or imprisonment. He didn't just run, he plunged from the celestial heights of the Aesir, hurtling down through the cosmos along the hidden, treacherous pathways that connected the 9 worlds. The shimmering light of Asgard vanished behind him, swallowed by an encroaching, absolute darkness. His journey was a frantic descent, not only through physical space but into a realm of shadow and fire, a place utterly alien to the gods of the open sky. He was heading to Svartalfheim, the realm of the Black Elves, the subterranean kingdom of the dwarves. The path was not a simple one. He navigated through the gnarled, ancient roots of the world tree, Yggdrasil, which served as the skeletal framework for all existence. The air grew cold and thin, then thick and heavy, laden with the smell of damp earth, stone and something older, something metallic and primordial. The silence was unnerving, a profound void that seemed to press in on him, broken only by the frantic pounding of his own heart. Thor's promise echoed in his mind with every step. "I will hunt you across all 9 worlds, and I will tear you apart with my bare hands." As he descended deeper, the nature of the world changed. The oppressive darkness began to give way to a faint, ruddy glow that emanated from deep within the earth. The air became warmer, thick with the tang of coal and the sharp, acrid scent of superheated metal. The silence was slowly replaced by a distant, rhythmic percussion, a constant, deep-throated clang. Clang, clang that was both a heartbeat and a warning. It was the sound of dwarven forges, the eternal industry of a people who never slept. Loki had arrived. Svartalfheim was a breathtaking and terrifying sight. It was a world carved from the inside out. Immense, cathedral-like caverns stretched for miles, their ceilings lost in shadow, held aloft by colossal pillars of natural rock that had been polished smooth by generations of dwarven hands. The city was a masterpiece of subterranean engineering. Buildings were not constructed, but hewn directly from the living stone, their facades decorated with intricate carvings of mythic beasts and geometric patterns that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Rivers of molten metal flowed through stone-carved channels, casting a fiery, dancing light on the grim, determined faces of the dwarves who worked beside them. The entire realm was a testament to dwarven obsession with craft, order, and the acquisition of wealth from the earth's belly. Loki, regaining some of his composure, adopted an air of casual confidence as he walked the city's wide, stone-paved avenues. He observed the inhabitants with a keen, analytical eye. The dwarves were a stout, powerful people, built for labor and endurance. Their skin was pale from a life lived without sunlight, their eyes sharp and accustomed to the gloom. They were universally bearded, their beards intricately braided and often tucked into their belts, sometimes adorned with rings of gold and silver. They were a people of purpose. Miners hauled carts laden with glittering ores, merchants hawked rare gems under the fiery glow of the forges, and grim-faced guards, clad in dark, heavy armor, stood watch at every major intersection, their expressions suspicious of any outsider. Loki knew he was being watched. His tall, slender form and Aesir heritage made him stand out like a torch in a coal mine. He ignored the mistrustful glares, his mind focused on his objective, finding the forge of the sons of Ivaldi. They were the undisputed masters of their craft, a clan of smiths whose lineage was said to trace back to the earliest days of the world. Their creations were not mere objects. They were artifacts imbued with powerful magic, their skill so profound it was whispered they could forge a soul if they put their minds to it. He followed the sounds of the most powerful hammers, the roar of the hottest fires, which led him to a district at the very heart of the dwarven capital. Here the heat was intense, and the air was thick with sparks that flew like swarms of angry fireflies. Before him stood a massive gate of black iron, intricately worked with images of dragons and giants being overcome by dwarven heroes. This was the entrance to the great workshop of the sons of Ivaldi. Taking a deep breath to steel his nerves, Loki entered. The chamber within was a testament to their legendary status. It was a cavern so vast that the distant walls were lost in a haze of heat and smoke. The central feature was a forge of colossal size, its fires burning with a white-hot intensity that spoke of magic as much as combustion. The anvils, each the size of a small boulder, rang with a symphony of hammer blows, each strike perfectly timed and delivered with immense force. All around the workshop, finished and unfinished projects lay on display. Swords that shimmered with an eerie light, armor that seemed to absorb the very darkness around it, and jewels that pulsed with a life of their own. The sons of Ivaldi themselves were figures of awe. They were brothers, ancient and immensely powerful. Their bodies were corded with muscle from millennia of labor, their faces were landscapes of deep-set lines and soot, and their eyes held the fierce, intelligent glow of the forge fires they commanded. They worked with a seamless coordination, moving around the forge in a complex dance of fire, metal, and magic. Loki waited for a lull in their work, a moment when the final blow was struck on a glowing ingot, and the ringing echo began to fade. He then stepped forward into the light, adopting his most humble and deferential posture. "Great masters of the forge," he called out, his voice carefully modulated to convey respect and urgency. "I am Loki, of Asgard. I come before you in a time of great need, seeking the aid of the only craftsman in the 9 worlds who can solve my predicament." The eldest brother, whose beard was streaked with silver and braided with rings of platinum, turned his piercing gaze upon Loki. He wiped a hand across his sweaty brow, leaving a streak of soot. "Loki of Asgard," he grumbled, his voice like the grinding of stone. "The trickster, we know of you. Your kind brings trouble. State your business quickly. We have no time for the games of the gods." Loki's heart sank slightly at the cold reception, but he pressed on, launching into the carefully rehearsed narrative he had crafted on his journey down. He spoke of the unfortunate incident regarding Sif's hair, portraying it as a thoughtless prank that had spiraled out of control. He vividly described Sif's inconsolable grief, and more importantly, Thor's cataclysmic rage. He made sure to emphasize the part about Thor's threat to break every bone in his body, painting himself as a terrified wretch, utterly at the mercy of the Thunderer's wrath. "Thor has sworn an oath," Loki said, his voice trembling with feigned fear, "that my life is forfeit unless I can restore his wife's beauty. But not just restore it, he demands that her new hair be even more magnificent than the hair she lost. And so I have come to you. I have traveled to the heart of the earth to beg for your help. Forge for me a new head of hair for Sif. Spin it from the purest gold, weave it with the finest magic, so that it will attach to her head and grow as if it were her own. Only you, the legendary sons of Ivaldi, possess the skill for such a divine task." The dwarves listened, their expressions grim. The second brother, stockier and with a fiery red beard, spat into the forge. "You want us to clean up your mess. You anger the Thunderer and then come to us to save your hide. The affairs of the Aesir are not our concern. We have work to do." Loki had anticipated this resistance. This was the moment for his true gambit. He straightened up, his demeanor shifting from that of a desperate beggar to a cunning diplomat. "You mistake my proposal," he said smoothly. "I am not merely asking for a favor. I am offering an opportunity for glory that will echo through the ages." He paused, letting the words hang in the hot air. "Thor's anger is a terrible thing, yes, but the gratitude of the gods is a powerful treasure in itself. Think of it. If you succeed, your names will be celebrated in Asgard. Every time the gods look upon Sif's new, radiant hair, they will speak of the genius of the sons of Ivaldi." He saw a flicker of interest in their eyes. Pride was a dwarven virtue, and he was playing it like a master musician. "And you know what? Why stop there?" Loki continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let us make this a true testament to your unparalleled mastery. This is a chance to put all other smiths to shame, to prove once and for all that your forge is the greatest in all the 9 worlds. I propose you make not 1 but 3 legendary treasures. The golden hair for Sif, of course, but also a gift for Odin, the Allfather himself, and one for Freyr, the Lord of the Vanaheim and Master of the Harvest." He let his gaze sweep over the brothers, who were now listening with rapt attention. "Imagine it," he said, his voice filled with theatrical awe. 3 divine artifacts, all forged by your hands, presented in the great hall of Asgard. No dwarf, no elf, no giant will ever be able to dispute your supremacy. You will not just be legends, you will be the legend, the standard by which all craftsmanship is judged for eternity." The appeal was masterful. He had transformed a simple, if difficult, repair job into an epic contest for eternal fame and glory. He had appealed to their pride, their ambition, and their professional vanity all at once. The air in the forge grew thick with a new kind of tension. The dwarves looked at each other, their minds whirling with the possibilities. The challenge was immense, the materials required would be costly, but the potential reward, immortality in the sagas of the gods, was priceless. Finally, the eldest brother slammed his hammer down on the anvil, the resulting clang sealing the decision. "Very well, Loki of Asgard," he declared, a grudging respect now in his tone. "You have made a worthy proposition. The challenge is great, and therefore it is one we cannot refuse. We will forge these 3 treasures for you: the golden hair for Sif, a spear for Odin, and a ship for Freya. They will be the finest works to ever come from this forge. But know this, trickster," he added, pointing a thick, soot-stained finger at Loki. "If this is another one of your games, if you try to cheat us in any way, the wrath of Thor will be the least of your worries. The vengeance of the dwarves is slow, but it is as deep and as permanent as the mountains themselves." Loki bowed deeply, a triumphant smile finally breaking through his mask of humility. "You have my word," he said, knowing full well how little his word was worth. "I shall await your masterful creations." The bargain had been struck. The fires of the great forge roared to life with renewed vigor, and the sons of Ivaldi turned back to their work, their minds now filled with the grand designs of the treasures they would create. Loki had done it. He had turned a near-fatal disaster into a situation ripe with new possibilities for mischief and glory. The first treasure to be forged was the most urgent, the golden hair for Sif. It was the linchpin of the entire bargain, the key to placating Thor's apocalyptic rage. The dwarven masters began not with hammers and anvils, but with a quiet, intense consultation. They brought out ancient scrolls and diagrams, their gnarled fingers tracing patterns and runes that glowed faintly in the firelight. They selected the purest gold from their vaults, ingots that shone with a soft, internal light, gold that had been mined from the very heart of the world, untouched by greed or corruption. This gold was melted down in a special crucible, the flames beneath it fed with ancient petrified wood that burned with a clean white heat. As the gold turned to a shimmering liquid sun, the dwarves began to chant in their deep guttural tongue, their voices weaving spells of growth, vitality, and connection. Then the true artistry began. The molten gold was not poured or cast, but drawn. Using a complex apparatus of enchanted spindles and looms, they began to spin the liquid metal into threads of impossible fineness. Each strand was thinner than a spider's silk, yet possessed the strength of iron and the radiant beauty of a sunbeam. It was a slow, painstaking process. The dwarves worked in shifts, their concentration absolute, their movements a blur of practiced precision. They wove these golden threads together, creating a flowing cascade of hair that seemed to ripple and move with a life of its own, even as it lay upon their stone work table. Loki watched, mesmerized. The hair they were creating was more than just a beautiful object. It was a miracle. It shimmered and glowed, capturing and amplifying the light of the forge fires until it seemed to be the source of all light in the cavern. It was imbued with the enchantments they had chanted, spells that would allow it to fuse with Sif's scalp and grow, to be washed and braided, to live as her own hair had once lived. As the final thread was woven into place, a collective sigh went through the workshop. The first treasure was complete. A masterpiece of such breathtaking beauty, it almost made Loki forget the terror that had driven him there. With the hair carefully stored in an enchanted silk cloth, the sons of Ivaldi immediately turned their attention to the second treasure. The ship for Freya, which they would name Skidbladnir. This was a project of a different scale, a challenge of engineering and spatial magic. They started with the keel, laying down a single, impossibly long beam of a rare, dark wood that was both light as a feather and stronger than any oak. The wood had been harvested from a sacred grove deep within Svartalfheim, a grove that grew only in complete darkness and was nourished by underground rivers. They built the ship with a speed that was bewildering. Planks carved with runes of speed and favorable winds were fitted together with such perfect precision that no seam could be seen. They moved like a colony of ants, each dwarf knowing their role, their hammers rising and falling in a hypnotic, rhythmic chorus. The ship grew before Loki's eyes, its graceful, sweeping lines speaking of speed and elegance. The prow was carved into the likeness of a fierce dragon, its eyes inlaid with glowing gems. The true marvel of Skidbladnir, however, was in its enchantments. As the physical construction neared completion, the master rune carvers of the clan were brought in. They covered every surface of the ship, from the masthead to the rudder, with intricate, interlocking runes. These were spells of compression, of wind calling, of spatial manipulation. The largest and most complex runes were carved onto the main mast, spells that guaranteed that wherever Skidbladnir sailed, a fair wind would always fill its sails. The final enchantment was the most astounding. The eldest of the clan placed his hands on the prow of the magnificent ship, a vessel now large enough to carry all the gods of Asgard and their retinues. He began a low, rumbling chant, and as he did, the ship began to shimmer and fold. The mast telescoped down, the sails furled themselves, the hull folded in on itself like the most complex and delicate of paper creations. It shrank and shrank, collapsing into a small, intricate bundle of wood and cloth, no larger than a silk handkerchief. One of the dwarves then picked it up and tucked it neatly into a small leather pouch. Loki stared, his mouth agape. A warship capable of carrying an army could now be carried in a pocket. The third and final treasure was the spear for Odin, Gungnir. For this, the dwarves brought forth a bar of Uru, a rare celestial metal harvested from a fallen star that had crashed into the mountains of Nidavellir eons ago. The metal glowed with a faint, otherworldly blue light and was notoriously difficult to work with, its melting point far beyond that of any normal forge. The main forge was stoked to an incredible temperature, the flames roaring like a captured storm. The Uru ingot was placed in the heart of the fire, and the dwarves began to work the great bellows, their powerful arms pumping in unison, forcing the flames to an even greater intensity. The air grew so hot that Loki was forced to retreat to the far side of the cavern, shielding his face from the searing heat. When the Uru finally began to soften, glowing like a piece of the daytime sky, the master smiths moved in. Their hammers, also forged from enchanted metal, rang against the ingot with a sound that was both a musical chime and a crack of thunder. Sparks flew not red or yellow, but a brilliant, searing blue, lighting up the cavern with flashes of starlight. They drew the metal out, shaping it, folding it back on itself countless times to give it unparalleled strength and resilience. They forged the spearhead, a wicked, leaf-shaped blade that seemed to drink the very light from the air. The haft was crafted from the wood of a young, straight ash tree, a direct descendant of Yggdrasil itself, and it was bound to the spearhead with bands of enchanted gold. As with Skidbladnir, the final stage was the work of the rune masters. They covered the entire surface of the spearhead with runes of seeking, of accuracy, of unyielding purpose. The final and most powerful rune, the rune of inevitability, was carved at the very tip. This was the magic that would guide Gungnir's flight, that would ensure it would always strike its intended target, no matter how skilled the foe or how powerful their defenses. When the last rune was carved, a profound silence fell over the forge. The spear lay on the anvil, pulsing with a quiet, immense power. It was perfectly balanced, a thing of deadly grace and terrible beauty. It was a weapon fit for a king, a symbol of absolute authority and inescapable fate. 3 treasures were now complete. The sons of Ivaldi, their faces streaked with soot and sweat but glowing with pride, laid them out for Loki's inspection. There, on a table of polished black stone, lay the salvation of Loki's life and a testament to the supreme artistry of the dwarves. The golden hair of Sif shimmered with a light so pure and vibrant it seemed to breathe. Beside it lay the small leather pouch containing the mighty Skidbladnir, a marvel of magical engineering. And next to that lay Gungnir. Its blue-tinged blade promising death, its ashen haft promising authority. Loki stood before them, for once in his life, utterly speechless. He had come to the dwarves with a problem, and they had answered with a display of creation so profound it bordered on the divine. He looked upon the 3 treasures, and felt the familiar stirrings of his own arrogant, competitive nature rising within him. Loki strode out of the Ivaldi clan's forge with his 3 treasures, but instead of going back to Asgard, he paused in the echoing, torchlit tunnels of Svartalfheim. The immediate, gut-wrenching fear of Thor's retribution had subsided, replaced by a feeling far more dangerous for a creature like Loki, a heady, intoxicating wave of success. He had done it. He had faced total annihilation, and had not only survived, but had orchestrated the creation of legendary artifacts. The relief was immense, but it was quickly consumed by a far more potent emotion. Arrogance. His mind, a perpetual engine of chaos and ambition, was already spinning far beyond the simple act of delivering the treasures. Returning to Asgard now would mean crawling back, a pardoned transgressor who had fixed his own mess. He would be forgiven, but he would also be diminished, his prank having ended in a frantic, desperate plea for his life. The story would be about Thor's wrath and Loki's cowardice. He could not permit that. The narrative had to be his. He needed to return to Asgard not as a supplicant, but as a triumphant orchestrator of a grand event, a benefactor who had, through his own magnificent cunning, brought about a new golden age of divine treasures. The Ivaldi clan's work was exquisite, a testament to their legendary skill. But as Loki stood there in the subterranean gloom, a corrosive thought began to form. Were they truly the best? Or were they just the most famous? The dwarves of Svartalfheim were a proud, fractious people. Their clans were fiercely competitive, their professional rivalries the stuff of legend. And Loki, a master of exploiting divisions, knew of another forge, one that operated on principles of raw power rather than delicate artistry. He knew of the brothers Brokkr and Sindri. Where the sons of Ivaldi were poets of metal and magic, Brokkr and Sindri were warlocks of the forge, tamming cosmic forces and hammering them into physical form. A slow, wicked smile spread across Loki's face. The plan that unfolded in his mind was audacious, profoundly reckless, and utterly irresistible. He would take Ivaldi's perfect creations and use them as a goad. He would pit the 2 greatest forges in the 9 worlds against each other. It would be a contest for the ages, a glorious spectacle of creation and competition. and he, Loki, would be the master of ceremonies, the one who had made it all happen. It was a gamble of the highest order, but the potential rewards, glory, chaos, and the humiliation of the proud dwarves were too tempting to ignore. The threat of Thor's hammer felt a world away, overshadowed by the intoxicating allure of this new, grander game. He adjusted his path, turning away from the passages that led up towards the light of the upper worlds, and delved deeper into the heart of the dwarven realm. The tunnels here were rougher, the air thicker with the smell of coal and brimstone. The rhythmic clang of the Rivaldi's forge faded, replaced by a deeper, more violent thunder that seemed to shake the very stone beneath his feet. This was the domain of Brocka and Sindri. Their workshop was less a hall of art and more a volcanic cavern of pure industry. The central forge was a pit of roaring, white-hot flame that seemed to draw the air from the entire chamber, its heat so intense it warped the very air around it. The anvils were scarred and blackened from eons of brutal work. There were no intricate carvings on the walls, only racks of grim, powerful tools and stacks of raw, formidable materials. Iron from the hearts of mountains, star metal that pulsed with a cold, blue light, and bones of long-dead giants. The brothers themselves were a study in contrasts. Sindri was the mastermind, a dwarf of surprising stillness amidst the chaos. His eyes, sharp and ancient, missed nothing. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, directing the flow of materials and magic with subtle gestures, his mind a storehouse of forbidden lore and elemental secrets. He was the brain of the operation. Brocka was its heart. He was a mountain of muscle and stubborn will, his body seemingly carved from the same rock as the cavern walls. His role was singular and absolute, to provide the raw, tireless power the forge demanded. He worked the great bellows, a monstrous contraption of iron and dragonhide, his arms pumping with a relentless metronomic rhythm that was the thundering heartbeat of the workshop. He was pure endurance, a living engine of dwarven fortitude. Loki entered the cavern, his approach deliberately casual, projecting an aura of someone who belonged in such a place of power. He waited for a pause in their work, a moment when Brocka ceased his pumping, and the roar of the forge subsided to a hungry growl. "A powerful display of brute force," Loki called out, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. He made a show of looking around the grim, functional workshop, a look of mild disappointment on his face. "One can certainly see the effort involved, all this sweat and noise. It's almost impressive, in a rustic sort of way." Brocka turned, his face, already red from the heat, darkening with anger. "Who are you to wander into our forge and cast insults?" he demanded, his voice a gravelly roar. "Speak your name, surface dweller, before I toss you into that fire." "I am Loki," he replied, a lazy smile on his face. "Of Asgard, and I meant no insult. I am merely an observer, an admirer of craft, and I have just come from a place of true craft, the forge of the sons of Ivaldi." At the mention of their rivals, both brothers stiffened. The professional jealousy between the two clans was legendary. "I have seen what they can do," Loki continued, his tone turning pitying. "I have seen them spin gold into living hair. I have seen them fold a mighty warship into a scrap of cloth. They work with a subtlety, an artistry that is truly divine. It has made me realize something." "And what is that?" Sindri asked, his voice quiet but laced with a dangerous edge. He had not moved, but his entire focus was now on Loki. "It has made me realize that there are different tiers of skill in this world," Loki said, his voice dripping with condescension. "There is the artistry of the Ivaldi clan, which belongs in the halls of the gods. And then there is this," he gestured around the forge. "Strong work, to be sure, loud work, but it is the work of laborers, not masters. It is blacksmithing, not creation." The insult was direct, profound, and exquisitely calculated. It struck at the very core of the brothers' pride. Brocka took a half step forward, his hands clenched into fists the size of small hammers, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You dare," Brocka seethed. "You dare stand in the forge that created 1,000 wonders and speak such poison. There is nothing those dandified metal polishers can make that my brother and I cannot surpass in every way." Loki laughed, a high, mocking sound. "Oh, I am sure you believe that, but belief and reality are two very different things. I have their creations here. I say that you cannot, with all your fire and fury, forge 3 items that the gods themselves would judge as their equal, let alone their superior." "Is that a challenge?" Sindri asked, his eyes narrowing. "It is a statement of fact," Loki sneered. "But if you wish to treat it as a challenge, I am willing to be entertained. What would you be willing to wager on this little contest? Your forge, your fortunes?" "We wager our honor," Brocka declared. "And you, what will you wager, trickster? You have nothing that we desire." Loki's smile became predatory. "Oh, I have something. Something that I value quite highly." If you can create 3 treasures that the gods judge to be greater than the 3 I now hold, you may have my head." The finality of the words silenced the forge completely. The apprentices stared, wide-eyed. A wager of one's head was the most sacred and unbreakable of oaths. It was a magical contract, bound by the ancient laws of the cosmos. To offer it was a sign of either supreme confidence or utter madness. Sindri looked at his brother, then back at Loki. He saw the arrogance in the god's eyes, but he also saw the glimmer of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. To defeat the sons of Ivaldi in a direct contest, to have their work judged superior by the gods of Asgard, would grant them a level of prestige and glory that no amount of gold could buy. It would cement their legacy for all time. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "We accept your wager, Loki of Asgard," Sindri said, his voice ringing with finality. "We will forge 3 treasures. And when the gods have made their judgment, my brother will have the pleasure of taking your head from your shoulders." "I am trembling with anticipation," Loki mocked, though a flicker of genuine fear briefly touched his heart. He had set the stage, and now the actors were playing their parts perfectly. He had what he wanted, a legendary contest, a new layer of chaos, and a chance to return to Asgard as a hero. All he had to do now was ensure that Brokkr and Sindri failed. "Then begin," Loki said, gesturing grandly towards the forge. "The gods of Asgard await your masterpieces. And I," he added, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper as he retreated to a dark corner of the cavern, "will be watching every step." The challenge had been issued and accepted. The terms were set, the stakes absolute. Brokkr turned to the bellows, his face a grim mask of determination. Sindri began to gather his materials, his mind already lost in the complex designs and powerful enchantments he would need. The forge fires roared, hungry and expectant. The air crackled with tension and the promise of creation. The competition was about to begin. The brothers started with a strange and humble material that seemed, to Loki's sneering eyes, a poor beginning for a divine treasure. Sindri walked to a large, iron-bound chest, and from it, he lifted a freshly prepared pig's skin. It was pale and supple, perfectly cleaned, yet it was still just the hide of a common farm animal. Loki almost laughed aloud. The sons of Ivaldi had begun their work with pure, celestial uru and flawless gold. These 2 were starting with barnyard scraps. His confidence swelled. This contest was already his. Sindri, however, handled the pigskin with a reverence that gave Loki a moment's pause. He laid it upon the great, scarred anvil as a sacred offering. He then turned to his brother, his expression devoid of any emotion save for a grim, absolute focus. "Brokkr," Sindri said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the hungry roar of the forge. "The time has come. Your task is simple in instruction, but it will be the hardest work you have ever done. You must man the bellows. You will pump the air into the heart of the fire, and you will not stop. You will not slow, you will not falter for a single breath. The magic I am about to weave is a continuous thread. If the flow of air is broken, the thread will snap and the work will be ruined. Everything we are, our honor and our lives, rests on the strength of your arms and the endurance of your will. Do you understand?" Brokkr met his brother's gaze. He didn't need to speak. He gave a single, powerful nod. He was the strength of their partnership, and he would not fail. He moved to the bellows, spat on his hands, rubbed them together, and took his grip. With a deep grunt, he began the work. The first push of the bellows sent a massive gust of air into the forge pit. The flames, which had been a churning sea of orange and red, roared and intensified, coalescing into a focused, white-hot pillar of pure heat. Sindri, seemingly oblivious to the searing temperature, took the pig's skin and with a pair of long iron tongs, plunged it deep into the heart of the fire. Instantly, the skin should have been consumed, turned to ash in a fraction of a second. But as Sindri began to chant, his voice a low, melodic hum that was somehow audible even over the roar of the fire, a shimmer of magical energy enveloped the hide. The flames licked at it, but they did not burn it. Instead, the fire seemed to be absorbed by it, feeding it, changing its very nature. Watching from his dark corner, Loki felt the first real flicker of concern. This was no ordinary smithing. This was deep magic, the kind that drew on the primal forces of creation. The arrogant smirk on his face tightened. He could not afford to let them succeed. The stakes were too high, and the memory of Thor's fingers around his throat was still chillingly fresh. He had to intervene. Closing his eyes, Loki focused his will. His form began to twist and contort. When he opened his eyes again, they were the multifaceted orbs of an insect. He had become a gadfly, a large, black, blood-sucking pest, his wings buzzing with an irritating, venomous hum. He took to the air and went for Brokkr. The dwarf was a titan of muscle and sweat, his arms rising and falling with a perfect, unbreakable rhythm. Loki knew that a simple sting would not be enough. He had to strike at a point of maximum distraction, at a moment of peak exertion. He circled Brokkr's massive form and saw the dwarf's hands, calloused and scarred, gripping the iron levers. An appealing target. Loki swooped down and landed on the back of Brocca's right hand, right on the bulging tendon that ran from his wrist to his knuckles. Without hesitation, Loki plunged his needle-sharp proboscis deep into the dwarf's flesh. A bolt of sharp, searing pain shot up Brocca's arm. He grunted, a sound of pure agony, and his rhythm faltered for a fraction of a second. His grip on the lever loosened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, the steady roar of the forge wavered, the white-hot pillar of flame flickering from white to yellow. Loki buzzed with triumphant glee. He had done it. The spell was broken. But he had underestimated the iron will of the dwarf. Brocca's eyes, filled with a sudden, furious understanding, locked onto the far corner where Loki had been standing. He knew this was the trickster's work. A fresh wave of rage and determination surged through him, eclipsing the pain in his hand. He let out a defiant roar that was nearly as loud as the forge itself. His grip tightened, his muscles bunching like knots of iron. The pain was still there, a hot, throbbing fire in his hand, but he pushed it down, walled it off, and focused his entire being on his task. The rhythm of the bellows resumed, more powerful and more determined than before. The forge roared back to its peak intensity, the pillar of flame once again a solid, unwavering column of white-hot power. Loki, still in his fly form, pulled back in disbelief. The dwarf had endured. The spell was not broken. From across the forge, he saw Sindri give a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval to his brother, his chanting never ceasing. Inside the fire, the transformation was accelerating. The pig's skin was no longer recognizable. It had absorbed a tremendous amount of heat and magic, and it was beginning to take on a new shape. It swelled and solidified, a form emerging from the flames, not of burned leather, but of pure solid gold. Limbs began to sprout from the main body, a head took shape, and from its back, a magnificent mane of bristles began to grow, each one a thread of incandescent light. The process continued for what felt like an eternity, with Brocca never once slowing his pace, his face a mask of sweat-streaked, pain-filled determination. Finally, Sindri's chanting reached a crescendo. He raised his hands, and with a final, powerful word of command, the magic was sealed. He signaled for Brocca to stop. Sindri pulled their creation from the heart of the fire and placed it on the stone floor. It stood there, steaming slightly, a creature of impossible beauty and power. It was a magnificent, full-grown boar, its entire body forged from shimmering, flawless gold. But its most astounding feature was its mane and bristles. They were golden and glowed with a fierce, internal luminescence, casting a brilliant, warm light that banished every shadow from the cavern. The boar shook its mighty head, its golden tusks gleaming, and let out a snort that sounded like the rolling of distant thunder. It pawed the ground, its golden hooves striking sparks from the stone. "This," Sindri announced, his voice filled with a weary but triumphant pride, "is Gullinbursti, the golden bristled." He looked directly at Loki, who had transformed back to his Aesir form, and was staring at the creature with a mixture of awe and horror. His bristles will light the darkest path, and he can run faster than any horse, through the sky and over the sea as easily as on land. He will be a worthy mount for the god Freya. Loki stood speechless. The boar was a masterpiece. It was alive, imbued with a powerful, vital spirit. It was a treasure that combined beauty, utility, and raw, untamed power. It was, he realized with a sinking heart, every bit the equal of the Ivaldi clan's creations. His first attempt at sabotage had failed utterly. He had inflicted pain on Brocca, but in doing so he had only strengthened the dwarf's resolve and fueled the magic of the forge. He had lost the first round. 2 treasures remained to be forged, and the weight of his wager suddenly felt very, very real. Sindri, allowing himself a brief, grim smile of satisfaction, gestured for his apprentices to lade the golden boar to a reinforced pen. The creature went willingly, its glowing bristles casting a warm, golden light that momentarily banished the oppressive gloom of the deep earth. "One treasure," Sindri said, his voice flat and devoid of triumph. He turned his piercing gaze to Loki. 2 more to go. Are you enjoying the show, trickster?" Loki forced a nonchalant shrug, though his heart was pounding. "A charming little pet," he said, his voice dripping with forced disdain. "Impressive for what it is, but the gods have little need for farm animals, however shiny. Let's see if you can make something of true value." Brocca, who had been tending to the vicious bite on his hand, glared at Loki with pure hatred. "You will eat those words," he growled, "and then I will have your head for it." Sindri ignored the exchange. He was already moving on to the next task. He strode to a heavily secured vault built into the cavern wall, and after manipulating a series of complex locks, pulled out a stack of heavy gold ingots. This was old gold, deep gold, imbued with the earth's raw magic. It was so pure it seemed to drink the light of the forge, glowing with a soft, internal warmth. "The second creation," Sindri announced, his voice taking on a more reverent tone, will be a treasure of wealth, a symbol of endless prosperity. It will be a gift worthy of the Allfather himself. He placed one of the ingots on the anvil and turned to his brother. Broca, again, the same rules apply. The magic for this piece is a continuous spiral. If you break the rhythm, the spiral will collapse and all will be lost. Do not fail me. Broca nodded, his face a grim mask. He took his place at the bellows once more, the pain in his hand forgotten, replaced by a cold, burning determination to succeed. He took a deep breath, and with a powerful grunt, the forge roared back to life, the flames leaping high as they consumed the fresh air. Sindri placed the gold ingot into the heart of the inferno. As the metal began to glow and soften, he began a new chant. This one was different from the first. It was a complex, looping melody of words, a spell of multiplication and cyclical creation. He was weaving a spiral of magic, each chanted phrase building upon the last, creating a vortex of creative energy within the forge. Loki watched, his mind racing. The boar was a problem, but this was something else entirely. A treasure of endless wealth was a concept that even the gods would covet. It was a prize that could very well win the competition on its own. He could not, under any circumstances, allow them to complete it. He had to break Broca's concentration, and this time, a simple bite on the hand would not be enough. He needed to inflict a level of pain that even the stubborn dwarf could not ignore. Once again, he transformed into the gadfly. He took to the air, his wings beating with a frantic, angry buzz. He circled Broca, studying him, looking for a point of vulnerability, and noted his neck was exposed. Just below the line of his thick, braided beard, there was a patch of skin, flushed red from the heat of the forge. That would be his target. He waited for the peak of Broca's exertion, the moment when the dwarf's muscles were at their most strained. Then he dove. He flew like a black arrow, silent and deadly, and plunged his stinger deep into the side of Broca's neck. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Broca let out a bellow of pure, unadulterated agony. The pain was 1,000 times worse than the first bite. It was a hot, venomous fire that spread through his neck and shoulders, making his muscles seize and spasm. His entire body arched backwards, his head snapping back as if he had been struck by an invisible hammer. The handles of the bellows slipped from his grasp. The rhythm was broken. Loki buzzed with triumphant joy. He had done it. The spell was shattered, the treasure ruined. But once again he had misjudged the sheer, indomitable will of the dwarf. As Broca's body convulsed in pain, his eyes, wild with fury, found Loki's fly form hovering in the air. He saw the trickster, saw the source of his agony, and something inside him snapped. With a roar that was more beast than dwarf, he fought against the pain. He ignored the fire in his veins, the seizing of his muscles. He forced his hands back onto the levers of the bellows, his fingers digging into the iron with a crushing force. He had faltered for 2, maybe 3 heartbeats, but he was not broken. With a surge of pure, hate-fueled adrenaline, he began to pump again. The rhythm was ragged at first, but then it smoothed out, becoming even more powerful, more relentless than before. He was no longer just working the forge. He was pouring his rage, his pain, and his unyielding dwarven pride into the fire. The forge responded, roaring with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the cavern. Sindri, who had watched the entire exchange with a cold, impassive expression, now increased the tempo of his chant. He seized the surge of raw power that his brother was feeding into the fire and channeled it into the molten gold. The spiral of magic, which had wavered when Broca faltered, now spun with a terrifying, accelerated speed. The liquid gold began to swirl, forming a perfect, seamless circle. The raw magic of creation, fueled by Broca's pain and rage, was being poured into the ring, compressing, concentrating, until it was a solid, undeniable presence. The process seemed to go on for an age. Finally, with a climactic booming note, Sindri's chant ended. The forge fires died down and an expectant silence filled the cavern. Broca, utterly spent, collapsed against the bellows, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. His neck was swollen and red, but his eyes glowed with a triumphant fire. Sindri reached into the cooling crucible and lifted out their creation. It was a simple, unadorned arm ring, forged from the purest, deepest gold. It was elegant, beautiful, but to Loki's eyes it seemed underwhelming. It was just a piece of jewelry. It could not possibly compare to the living, breathing majesty of Gullinbursti, or the intricate, magical engineering of Skidbladnir. Loki's hope surged. Perhaps they had failed after all. "Behold," Sindri said, his voice quiet but resonant. He held the ring up and it seemed to absorb the torchlight, glowing with a soft, warm light of its own. "This is Draupnir, the Dripper." He turned his gaze to Loki, a flicker of a triumphant smile touching his lips. "It is a beautiful ring, is it not? But its true value is not in its appearance. Every 9th night, this ring will drip 8 new rings, each of them identical in weight and purity to the original. It is a source of infinite wealth, a treasure that will never cease to give." Loki's heart plummeted into a cold, dark abyss. He stared at the ring, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of what the dwarves had created. A self-replicating source of endless gold. It was a treasure beyond price, beyond measure. It was a gift that would make Odin, the All-Father himself, indebted to its creators. It was a treasure that, on its own, could win the competition. He had failed again. His sabotage had not only been ineffective, it had seemingly made the dwarves' work even more powerful. He had 2 losses now, and only 1 creation left. The pressure was immense. He had one final chance to disrupt their work, one final chance to save his own head. And as he looked at the exhausted but defiant face of Brokkr, and the cold, confident eyes of Sindri, he knew that this final act of sabotage would have to be his most cruel, his most desperate, and his most devastating. The fate of his wager and his life would be decided in the next and final forging. Sindri, his face grim and set, strode to the darkest corner of the forge, a place where even the roaring fires seemed to keep a respectful distance. From a heavily fortified chest, bound with chains inscribed with runes of warding, he retrieved the final material. It was a block of raw iron, but it was unlike any iron Loki had ever seen. It was not of the earth. It was a piece of a fallen star, a chunk of celestial metal that had plummeted from the heavens in a forgotten age. It absorbed the light of the forge, seeming to pull the very shadows towards it, and it hummed with a low, latent power that made the hairs on Loki's arms stand on end. For the final treasure, Sindri announced, his voice low and resonant, we will forge a weapon for the protector of Asgard, for the son of Odin. We will forge a warhammer for Thor. Loki's blood ran cold. A weapon for Thor. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. The entire convoluted chain of events, his cruel prank, Thor's incandescent rage, his desperate journey to Svartalfheim, this reckless wager, was now culminating in the creation of a weapon for the very god he had wronged. It was a perfect, terrible symmetry, and Loki felt like a rat caught in a trap of his own design. This will be our masterwork, Sindri continued, placing the block of star metal on the anvil with a heavy, definitive thud. He turned his piercing gaze to his brother. Brokkr, his neck still swollen and red from Loki's last attack, met his gaze with a look of pure, unadulterated resolve. The pain, the exhaustion, the fury, it was all there, but it had been forged into a single point of diamond-hard determination. Brokkr, Sindri said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though it carried through the entire cavern. Our name, our honor, our very lives now rest on the strength of your arms. You understand what must be done. You must not, under any circumstances, stop pumping the bellows. Brokkr simply nodded, his eyes never leaving his brother. He moved to the great bellows, his movements slow and deliberate. He was conserving his energy, focusing his mind. The pain from Loki's previous bites was a constant, throbbing fire, but he pushed it to the back of his mind. It was just another distraction, another test of his will. He took his stance, his feet planted wide, his body a fortress of muscle and bone. Sindri placed the block of star metal into the forge. The moment the celestial iron touched the flames, the fire roared with a new, terrifying hunger. It changed color, from white-hot to a blinding, ethereal blue, the color of a lightning strike in a midnight sky. The temperature in the cavern skyrocketed, and Loki, even from his corner, felt the searing heat on his skin. Brokkr began to pump. The first surge of air hit the blue flames, and they erupted with a sound like the sky tearing apart. Sindri began his chant, and this time it was not a melody or a spiral of words. It was a raw, percussive litany of power, a series of short, explosive commands that seemed to strike the very air like hammer blows. Loki watched, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, his last chance. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he could not allow this hammer to be created. It was not just about the wager anymore. A weapon of this magnitude in the hands of Thor would be a constant, terrifying reminder of his own transgression. He had to stop it. He transformed one last time. He became the gadfly, but this time he poured all of his desperation, all of his cunning, all of his divine power into the transformation. He was smaller, faster, and his stinger was sharper. Coated with a venom drawn from the darkest corners of his own malicious spirit. He flew into the inferno of the forge, the heat so intense it threatened to incinerate his tiny form. He saw Brokkr, a titan of endurance, his body slick with sweat, his muscles straining with every powerful pump. The dwarf's eyes were closed, his face a mask of absolute concentration. Loki knew that no amount of pain inflicted on his arms or neck would be enough to break him this time. The dwarf had walled himself off, his mind a fortress. Loki had to find a way through that wall. He had to attack his senses, to break his focus from the inside out. He flew directly at Brokkr's face. He buzzed past his ears, a distracting, infuriating sound. He darted in front of his closed eyes, a flicker of movement in the red darkness behind his lids. Brokkr grunted, shaking his head, but his rhythm remained unbroken. Loki grew more desperate. He needed a target that the dwarf could not ignore, a place so vulnerable that the pain would be an irresistible, all-consuming shock. And then he saw it. the one place on the dwarf's face that was not protected by a thick beard or a furrowed brow. His eyelid with a final, desperate surge of speed, Loki shot forward and plunged his venomous stinger deep into the soft, delicate flesh of Brokka's right eyelid. The world exploded in a universe of pure, white-hot agony for Brokka. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced. It was not a bite, it was a violation, a searing brand of fire driven directly into his skull. His eye, his face, his entire head felt as if it had been split open by a lightning bolt. A scream of pure, animalistic pain was ripped from his throat. His body, reacting instinctively to the overwhelming trauma, betrayed him. His concentration shattered. His eyes flew open, though his right eye was already a swollen, bloody mess. And for one critical, fatal moment, his right hand let go of the bellows handle as he instinctively moved to claw at the source of his torment. The rhythm was broken. The great bellows, for the first time in the forging, faltered. The steady, powerful flow of air that was feeding the forge and sustaining Sindri's spell stuttered. The pillar of blue flame flickered violently, its roaring song dropping to a strangled hiss. Sindri's chant, which had been a continuous, powerful litany, was cut off mid-word. His eyes shot open, wide with alarm. He felt the thread of his magic, the delicate, volatile binding of the storm, snap. The power he had been controlling, the raw, cosmic energy of the thunder, was suddenly untethered. A wave of pure, concussive force erupted from the forge, throwing both brothers and Loki back against the far wall of the cavern. The apprentices screamed, diving for cover as small, superheated shards of metal flew through the air like shrapnel. The entire mountain groaned, and for a terrifying moment, it felt as if Sindri's dire prediction was about to come true. But the master smith, even in the face of catastrophe, did not lose his nerve. As the wave of force subsided, he scrambled back to his feet, his face pale with fury and disappointment. He barked a series of sharp, guttural commands to his apprentices, who rushed to dampen the forge fires, bringing the volatile situation under control. Brokka lay on the floor, groaning, his hand clamped over his bleeding eye. The pain was still immense, but it was nothing compared to the agony of his failure. He had faltered. At the most critical moment, he had broken. He had let his brother, his clan, and himself down. Loki, who had been slammed against the wall, slowly picked himself up. He was bruised and disoriented, but a wild, triumphant grin was spreading across his face. He had done it. He had finally succeeded. The spell was broken, the forging ruined. The hammer, if it existed at all, would be a flawed, useless lump of metal. The wager was his. His head was safe. Sindri, his expression as cold and hard as the heart of the mountain, strode to the now cooling forge. He reached in with his tongs, and from the smouldering embers he pulled out their final creation. It was a war hammer. Its head was perfectly forged, a solid, formidable block of the celestial iron, its surface swirling with faint blue patterns that seemed to move and shift like storm clouds. It pulsed with an immense, contained power, a power that made the air around it hum and crackle. It was, without a doubt, a weapon of terrifying potential. But Loki's grin widened as he saw the flaw. It was exactly as he had hoped. The handle, crafted from the ashwood, was ridiculously short. It was a handle fit for a child's toy, not a god's warhammer. It was so short that the weapon could only be wielded with one hand, robbing it of the balance and leverage that a proper two-handed hammer would possess. It was a glaring, undeniable imperfection. Loki threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing with pure, unadulterated triumph. "That is your masterpiece," he crowed, pointing a mocking finger at the flawed weapon. "That is the weapon you would pit against the perfect creations of the Ivaldi. A hammer with a stump for a handle. You have failed. The contest is over, and I have won. My head remains on my shoulders." He was so consumed by his victory that he did not see the strange, unreadable expression on Sindri's face. The dwarf looked at the hammer, his expression a mixture of profound disappointment and a strange, deep respect. He looked at the short handle, a permanent, undeniable symbol of his brother's momentary weakness and Loki's successful sabotage. Then he looked at the hammer's head, and he felt the immense, world-breaking power that thrummed within it. "The handle is short," Sindri said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that cut through Loki's laughter and silenced him instantly. "That is true, a flaw born of your treachery. But the heart of the hammer, Loki, the heart is strong." He held the hammer up, and despite its flawed handle, it felt perfectly balanced, its power singing in his hand. Its name is Mjölnir, and its worth is not something that can be judged by a glance. In his hand, the weapon seemed to pulse with a deep, internal power, the runes carved into its Uru head glowing with a soft, menacing blue light. "You see a short handle and believe you have won. Your eyes are sharp, but your mind is shallow. You have witnessed only the shell. You have failed to see the soul." Loki's laughter faltered, a nervous twitch replacing his confident smile. Sindri's tone was devoid of the disappointment Loki had expected. Instead, it was filled with the cold, absolute certainty of a master craftsman unveiling his magnum opus. First, Sindri began, his gaze fixed on the hammer. Know that this weapon is bound to its wielder by magic deeper than any oath. Its loyalty is absolute. He made a casual throwing motion, and the hammer flew from his hand, spinning through the cavern with a low hum that sounded like a gathering storm. It sailed across the vast workshop, a blur of dark metal and glowing runes, before it arced, seemingly of its own accord, and flew back towards Sindri, landing in his waiting palm with a solid, satisfying thud. It will always return, Sindri stated, his eyes locking with Loki. It can be thrown across a field of battle or across an entire world. It can be knocked from its wielder's grasp or lost in the depths of the sea. It matters not. Its journey will always end where it began, in the hand of its master. It is a weapon that can never be lost, never be taken, and never be turned against the one who wields it. The first seed of genuine dread planted itself in Loki's heart. Skidbladnir could be folded away, a marvel of convenience. Gungnir never missed, a marvel of accuracy. But this was different. This was a weapon with an unbreakable bond, an extension of its wielder's very will. The strategic implications were immense. An enemy could never truly disarm its owner. He forced his face to remain neutral, but the color was beginning to drain from it. A clever trick, Loki managed, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. A useful property, I will admit, but is a returning rock more valuable than a ship that can carry all the gods? Sindri's lips curved into a semblance of a smile, a grim, terrifying sight on his soot-stained face. A returning rock? No, but this is not a rock. He shifted his grip on the short handle. Second, you should understand its purpose. This hammer was not made to be aimed. It was made to arrive. He continued, his voice dropping as he explained the weapon's most terrible secret. Once it is thrown, its path is not one of chance, nor is it guided by the skill of the thrower. Its path is one of inevitability. It hunts its target. It will fly through a blizzard, a magical barrier, or an army of giants. It will swerve around mountains and dive beneath shields. It will not be deflected. It will not be stopped. It will simply continue on its unalterable course until it strikes its mark. It is a sentence of death delivered from any distance. There is no defense against it. Loki felt a wave of cold wash over him, a chilling counterpoint to the searing heat of the forge. The blood drained from his face. His mind, usually a whirlwind of schemes and calculations, fell silent. He understood now. This was a weapon that broke the rules of combat. It rendered skill, speed, and defense utterly meaningless. It was an instrument of absolute guaranteed destruction. Gullinbursti was a magnificent mount, Draupnir a source of infinite wealth, but Mjölnir was a force of cosmic certainty. He looked at the hammer, at its simple, brutal form, and saw it for what it truly was. He saw it crashing through the skulls of giants. He saw it shattering the gates of fortresses. He saw it flying, unstoppable, across the battlefields of the Nine Worlds, an unerring harbinger of Thor's fury. The Ivaldi clan's treasures were masterpieces of art and utility. This was a masterpiece of war. And finally Loki, Sindri said, his voice now laced with a cold, triumphant mockery that mirrored the tone Loki himself had used just moments before. You, who are so clever with words and so quick to point out flaws, you mocked its size. You laughed at its short handle. With a flick of his wrist, Sindri tossed the hammer into the air. As it reached the apex of its arc, the runes on its surface blazed with a brilliant light. The hammer shimmered, its physical form seeming to dissolve and recondense. It shrank with a dizzying speed, its massive, heavy head and short, thick handle collapsing in on themselves until what landed back in Sindri's palm was a small, smooth metal pendant, no larger than his thumb. It hung from a simple leather thong, radiating a quiet, contained power, but utterly harmless in appearance. It can be as large as a boulder or as small as a trinket, Sindri explained, letting the pendant dangle from his fingers. It can be worn beneath a tunic, hidden from the eyes of enemies, its true nature concealed until the moment its wielder chooses to unleash its power. That flaw you were so quick to mock, the short handle, makes it all the easier to conceal. It is a thunderstorm that can be hidden in the palm of a hand. He closed his hand around the pendant, and with a silent command, it expanded back to its full, fearsome size, the heavy hammerhead resting in his palm once more. Loki stood frozen, his mind a wasteland of shattered confidence. Every word Sindri had spoken was a hammer blow against his own arrogance. The short handle was a flaw, yes, but it was a flaw that was rendered utterly, laughably insignificant in the face of the hammer's three magical properties. An unerring weapon that could not be lost and could be hidden from sight. It was the perfect instrument of destruction, designed for the god of thunder. He realized with a sickening, plummeting certainty that he had lost. He had not just lost his wager. He had, in his arrogant attempt to cause mischief, instigated the creation of the greatest weapon the Nine Worlds had ever known, and it was destined for the hands of the one god he feared most. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He looked over at Brocker, who was now standing, his hand still held to his bleeding eye. A slow, brutal, and utterly triumphant grin was spreading across the dwarf's face. It was the grin of a being who had endured unimaginable pain and was now about to receive his just reward. It was the grin of the executioner. Loki, accompanied by the dwarf Brokkr, returned to Asgard to have the treasures judged by a council of the gods. The journey from the subterranean depths of Svartalfheim was a silent, suffocating affair. The brilliant, shimmering path of the Bifrost, usually a welcome sight, felt like a long walk toward a gallows. Loki, for once in his life, found his usual glibness failing him. He clutched the bag containing the 3 masterpieces from the sons of Ivaldi, Sif's golden hair, Skidbladnir, and Gungnir. They were treasures of unquestionable genius, works of art and magic that should have guaranteed his victory. Yet the memory of the 3 treasures forged in the second forge, the raw, world-breaking power he had witnessed, gnawed at him. The short handle on the hammer was his only hope, a single, desperate flaw in an otherwise perfect trinity of power. His mind, a frantic loom of schemes, worked tirelessly, weaving contingency plans and clever arguments, but the cold dread in his gut told him that his wit might not be enough this time. His head, the very thing he had wagered with such cavalier arrogance, felt unnervingly loose on his shoulders. Brokkr, trudging beside him, was a monument to silent, simmering rage. He carried his and Sindri's creations in a heavy iron-bound chest. His knuckles white where he gripped the handle. The dwarf's right eye was a swollen, blackened ruin, a permanent testament to Loki's treachery. Every step on the Rainbow Bridge was a step closer to his vengeance. He had endured the fly's venom, had poured his own pain and rage into the bellows, and had helped forge wonders. He had absolute faith in his brother's skill and in the power of their creations. He looked at Loki not with the contempt one has for a rival, but with the cold, patient certainty of an executioner. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the dwarf's righteous fury and the god's desperate fear. As they reached the great gates of Asgard, they found the realm buzzing with an electric anticipation. The news of Loki's wager had spread like wildfire. This was a drama of the highest order, and the Aesir and Vanir, ever hungry for such spectacle, had gathered from every corner of the realm. The city was alive with gossip and speculation. Gods placed their own wagers, arguing the merits of elegance versus power, of artistry versus raw elemental force. This was no longer just about Loki fixing his mistake. He had, in his arrogance, escalated it into an event that would define an age. Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian of the Bifrost, let them pass without a word, though his piercing gaze seemed to strip Loki bare, seeing straight through his feigned confidence to the terror beneath. The 2 competitors walked the golden streets of Asgard, the gods parting before them, their faces a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and in some cases undisguised contempt for the trouble-making Loki. The judgment was to take place in Gladsheim, the great council hall of the gods. It was a space designed to inspire awe. The ceiling, vaulted so high it seemed to capture a piece of the night sky, was held aloft by massive pillars of polished silver that gleamed in the light of 1,000 torches. The walls were adorned with immense tapestries that depicted the history of the 9 worlds, from the creation of the cosmos to the Great War with the Vanir. At the far end of the hall, upon a raised dais, sat 3 high thrones. These were the seats of the judges. In the center sat Odin, the Allfather. He rested on his throne, Echlidskjalf, his single eye holding a depth of ancient wisdom that seemed to encompass all of time. He was cloaked in shadows, his face grim, his presence an aura of absolute authority. He was not here for the sport. He was here to assess the strategic value of these new treasures, to weigh how they would shift the balance of power in the inevitable, endless war against the giants. To his right sat Thor, the god of thunder. He was not seated, but stood beside his throne, his massive arms crossed over his chest, his red beard bristling with a barely contained energy. He was a storm cloud given human form. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were fixed on Loki with a cold, unforgiving fire. This entire affair had begun with a violation of his home and his wife. For him, this was not a contest. It was the final act of a trial. His gaze promised that if Loki's cleverness failed him, Thor's would deliver the final, brutal judgment. Near him sat Sif, her face obscured by a veil of fine, grey silk, a silent, powerful reproach to the god of mischief. To Odin's left sat Freyr, the golden-haired lord of the Vanir. He was the god of sun, rain, and the peaceful bounty of the earth. His presence brought a measure of calm to the proceedings. He would judge the treasures not for their capacity for war, but for their ability to bring prosperity, joy, and beauty to the worlds. His gaze was kind, but also discerning. He would not be easily swayed by flash or spectacle. The rest of the hall was a sea of divine faces. Tyr, the one-handed god of justice, stood grim and silent, his presence a reminder that oaths and wagers were binding. Frigg, the queen of the gods, watched with an expression of maternal concern, her love for all her children, even the troublesome Loki, warring with her sense of order. Balder the Beautiful, Idun with her life-giving apples, the silver-tongued Bragi, all were there, their collective presence amplifying the gravity of the moment. Odin rose and held up his hand, and a profound silence fell over the vast hall. The crackling of the torches and the distant sound of the wind were the only things to be heard. "We are gathered here today," Odin's voice boomed, each word resonating with the power of ages, "to bear witness and to render judgment. A wager has been made. A contest of creation has been completed. The honor of two great dwarven houses is at stake, as is the head of Loki, son of Farborti." Odin's single eye swept across the assembly, then settled on the two figures standing in the center of the hall. "The terms are known, the price is set, the time for judgment has come. Let the treasures be brought forth." Two long, low tables of black, polished stone were carried into the center of the hall by several of the Einherjar, the resurrected warriors of Valhalla. They were placed side by side, forming a stage for the 6 legendary artifacts. Loki, seeing his cue, plastered a confident, charming smile on his face. It was a masterful performance, a mask of nonchalant bravado that concealed the frantic terror churning in his stomach. With a theatrical bow to the judges, he strode to one of the tables. He was the champion of the Sons of Ivaldi, and he would present their work with all the flair and showmanship he could muster. He placed his large, silk-wrapped bundle on the stone surface, his movements fluid and graceful. On the other side, Broca moved with a different energy. There was no grace, no showmanship. He moved with a heavy, purposeful tread, his every step a testament to his unyielding, earthy nature. He heaved the heavy, iron-bound chest he carried onto the second table with a loud, defiant thud that echoed through the silent hall. He stood by his chest, his arms crossed, his one good eye glaring at Loki with an expression of pure, unadulterated loathing. He would let the work speak for itself. The two champions stood on opposite sides of their respective treasures, separated by a few feet of stone and an ocean of animosity. Loki, the silver-tongued god of tricks and air, and Broca, the silent, stubborn dwarf of earth and iron. The entire hall held its breath. Loki, feeling the weight of every god's stare, pushed down the frantic fluttering in his chest and summoned the last reserves of his theatrical bravado. This was his final performance, and everything depended on it. With a sweeping, almost mocking bow to the high thrones, he strode to the first stone table. "My lords, my ladies," his voice, smooth as oiled silk, resonated through the cavernous space. "As you know, a grave error was committed, a wrong that demanded a right. I was tasked under threat of considerable discomfort," he said with a wry glance at Thor, "to restore what was lost. I journeyed to the deepest, darkest corners of the earth, to the forges of Svartalfheim, where the very mountains tremble with the force of creation. There I sought out the Sons of Ivaldi, artisans whose fame is whispered in every hall in every realm. I did not merely ask them to fix my mistake. No, I challenged them to create wonders, to forge treasures that would not just appease, but enrich the halls of Asgard for all time. And they, in their magnificent genius, have answered, behold." With a single, dramatic pull, he swept the heavy silk cloth from his first offering. A collective gasp, a single, unified intake of breath, rippled through the entire assembly. On the cold, black stone lay the golden hair of Sif. It was more than a wig, more than a simple replacement. It was a living sun. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, each of the million threads a perfect strand of spun sunlight, so fine and delicate that it seemed to float and writhe on the stone as if stirred by a gentle, invisible breeze. It did not just reflect the light of the hall's great fires. It seemed to drink it in and amplify it, casting a warm, golden glow that made the shadows in the corners of the hall retreat. It was beauty incarnate, a perfect, impossible object. "For the Lady Sif," Loki announced, his voice taking on a tone of deep, practiced reverence, "so that her beauty, which is the jewel of Asgard, may shine brighter than ever before." He turned his gaze towards Sif, who had remained veiled and motionless beside Thor. Her presence was a constant, silent accusation, and Loki knew that appeasing her was the first and most crucial step in saving his own life. Slowly, gracefully, Sif rose. She moved through the parted sea of gods and reached out a trembling hand, her fingers hesitating for a moment before gently touching the golden threads. As her skin made contact with the enchanted metal, a soft, musical chime seemed to echo through the hall. The hair responded to her touch, its inner light flaring, its shimmering movement becoming more pronounced. It seemed to recognize its true mistress, to yearn for her. Loki, seeing his cue, lifted the hair from the table and held it out to Sif with another deep, respectful bow. She took it from him, her hands cradling it as if it were a fragile, priceless treasure. She then turned her back to the assembly, a gesture of quiet dignity that requested privacy for what was to come. She lifted her veil. The gods, respecting her silent wish, looked away. There was a moment of profound stillness, and then a soft, collective sigh of wonder went through the hall. When Sif turned back to face them, she was transformed. The veil was gone. The golden hair was upon her head, not as a wig, but as a part of her. It had already fused to her scalp, flowing down her back in a radiant, sun-drenched cascade that framed her face in a halo of pure divine light. It moved with her, each strand catching the light, creating a spectacle of breathtaking beauty. The shame and sorrow that had clung to her like a shroud were gone, replaced by a radiant confidence. A genuine, unrestrained smile, the first she had shown since the day of her violation, lit up her face. She looked at her husband, Thor, and the storm in his eyes, the rage that had threatened to shatter the foundations of Asgard, finally broke. The tension in his massive shoulders eased, replaced by a wave of profound relief, and a flicker of something that almost looked like gratitude towards Loki. Loki felt a surge of triumphant relief. He had passed the first test. He had healed the wound that had started this all. The threat of immediate, violent death from the Thunder God had receded. Emboldened, he moved to his second presentation. "For the noble Freya," he announced, his voice regaining its familiar, confident ring. "Lord of Ulfheim, master of the sun and the summer rain, a vessel worthy of his command, a ship to carry him across the waters of the 9 worlds." He held up the small, unassuming leather pouch. A few of the gods exchanged confused glances. This was a treasure, a simple purse. Loki's smirk returned in full force. He did not speak. He simply tossed the pouch into the open air in the center of the hall. As it began to fall, he whispered a single, sharp word of power. The result was instantaneous and spectacular. The pouch burst open, and from that tiny container, the great ship Mjölnir erupted into existence. It did not simply appear, it unfolded, like a magnificent, impossible flower blooming in a fraction of a second. The mast shot upwards, the hull expanded, the rigging materialized, and the great white sails unfurled with a sound like a thunderclap and a rushing gale combined. It grew and grew until it hovered there, a fully realized warship, its intricately carved dragon prow glaring down at the astonished gods. It was large enough to hold every single deity in the hall, with room to spare for their retinues and their steeds. And as it hung there, a magical wind, born from nowhere, began to fill its sails, causing the mighty vessel to strain against its invisible moorings, eager to set sail. The gods were stunned into silence. Even Odin's single eye widened in astonishment. A ship that could be carried in a pocket. The sheer, breathtaking utility of it was a concept that bordered on divine. Freya, the ship's intended owner, threw his head back and laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed through the hall. He looked at Loki with newfound respect. "And finally," Loki said, his voice now ringing with the absolute certainty of victory, as he turned to the high throne in the center. "For the Allfather, for Odin the wise, the terrible, the king of the gods, a weapon to enforce his will, a symbol of his authority." He reached down and picked up Gungnir from the stone table. The spear was a masterpiece of deadly simplicity. It was a long shaft of dark, polished yew, perfectly balanced, and tipped with a spearhead of the celestial metal uru. The uru was a flat, matte grey, seeming to drink the light from the hall, and the ancient, powerful runes carved into its surface seemed to wriggle like sleeping snakes. It pulsed with a quiet, cold, and utterly final menace. "A spear," Loki declared, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, "that knows no master but the one who holds it. A spear that knows no path but the one to its intended target. A spear that will never miss." He walked up the steps of the dais and presented the spear, haft first, to Odin. The Allfather took it, his hand closing around the familiar wood. He held it, feeling its weight, its perfect balance. He felt the immense, unerring magic that resided within it, a quiet promise of absolute accuracy. It was a king's weapon, a tool for delivering judgment from afar. Odin looked at the spear, then at Loki, and gave a single, slow, and meaningful nod of approval. Loki stepped back, his chest swelling with pride. He had done it. He had presented 3 treasures of such magnificence that his victory seemed assured. He had appeased Thor, delighted Freya, and impressed Odin. The murmurs of the crowd were now a buzz of open admiration. He cast a triumphant, pitying glance at Brokkr. How could the dwarf possibly hope to compete with this? Then Brokkr moved. There was no flair, no ceremony. The dwarf stomped to his iron-bound chest, his every movement radiating a stubborn, earthy power and a burning, righteous anger. He threw back the lid with a clang that silenced the hall. He reached inside and brought out their first creation. He held up Gullinbursti, the golden boar. If Skidbladnir was a marvel of utility, Gullinbursti was a marvel of life. It was not a static object. It was a living, breathing creature of pure, enchanted gold. Its bristles blazed with a light so intense it made the gods squint, a miniature sun that cast a warm, golden radiance over the entire assembly. The boar snorted, a puff of steam erupting from its golden snout, and pawed impatiently at the stone floor. Its powerful muscles rippled beneath its metallic hide. "Gullinbursti," Brokkr growled, his voice a low rumble. "He runs faster than any horse, over the water and through the air. His bristles like the darkest night." He presented it to Freya, who stared at it with wide, covetous eyes. Brokkr returned to the chest and brought out the second treasure, Draupnir. The golden arm ring was elegant but seemed almost plain after the living fire of the boar. Loki's confidence began to return, but then Brokkr spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of the magic he was describing. "Draupnir the Dripper," he said. "Every 9th night it will drip 8 new rings, of the same weight and purity as the original." He strode to the high throne and placed the ring in Odin's outstretched hand. A profound silence fell over the hall as the gods comprehended the gift. It was not just a treasure, it was a source of treasure. It was infinite wealth. It was a power that could reshape the fortunes of gods and mortals alike. Odin looked at the simple gold band in his hand, his single eye wide with a calculating, avaricious gleam. Finally, Brokkr reached into the chest for the last time. He grunted with the immense effort it took to lift Mjölnir, the great war hammer. The hammer hit the stone with a deafening, earth-shattering crack that shook the very pillars of Gladsheim. A tremor ran through the floor, and the assembled gods stumbled, crying out in alarm. It was as if a bolt of pure, concentrated lightning had struck the center of the hall. The hammer lay there, brutal and unadorned. Its short handle was a glaring, undeniable flaw. Loki saw it and grinned, but no one else was looking at the handle. They were staring at the hammerhead that seemed to contain a raging, captive storm. It radiated a power so raw, so primal, that it was almost a physical assault. The air around it crackled with ozone. "Mjölnir," Brokkr roared, his voice filled with a fierce, defiant pride. He looked directly at Thor, his one good eye blazing. "The Crusher, it will never break, it will never miss its target, and it will always return to your hand." He pointed at the hammer. "It is yours." Thor descended from the dais, his eyes locked on the weapon. He approached it slowly, as one would approach a wild, dangerous animal. He reached out his hand, and as his fingers brushed against the cool handle, a low rumble of thunder, born from the very heart of the world, echoed through the hall. He closed his hand around the short haft. The hammer was impossibly heavy, yet it rose into his grip as if it were weightless, a perfect extension of his own arm. He gave it a single, experimental swing. The air itself seemed to tear apart with a sound like the sky splitting open. A wave of pure, untamed power surged up his arm, a familiar storm fury, but now focused, amplified, and given a terrible, undeniable purpose. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Thor's face. He looked at the hammer, then at Loki, and in that single, predatory glance, all of the smug confidence drained from the trickster's body, replaced by a cold, primal fear. The 6 treasures were now displayed for all to see. Odin the All-Father now possessed the spear of perfect accuracy and the ring of infinite wealth. Freyr, the Lord of Prosperity, was now the master of the perfect ship and a living, radiant mount. Sif's beauty had been restored, her honor satisfied. And Thor, the god of thunder, now held the most terrible and powerful weapon the 9 worlds had ever known. The presentation was complete. The 3 judges, Odin, Freyr, and Thor, looked at the array of treasures, then at each other, and now had to weigh the worth of these magnificent, world-changing creations. The deliberation began. Freyr, the golden god of sun and summer rain, was naturally drawn to the treasures that spoke of life, prosperity, and joy. His fingers traced the intricate dragon prow of Skidbladnir, marveling at the seamless joinery and the impossible magic of its compression. It was a vessel of exploration and commerce, a tool for connecting the realms in peace. He then turned to Gullinbursti, the golden boar, whose radiant bristles warmed his face. The creature snorted and stamped its golden hoof, a being of pure, untamed vitality. It was the embodiment of the wild, fertile earth that was his domain. To Freyr, these were treasures that celebrated life and its boundless potential. Odin the All-Father moved with a different purpose. His single eye, which had sacrificed sight for wisdom, saw beyond mere form and function. He saw strategic value. He held Gungnir, the spear forged by the Ivaldi, and felt its unerring purpose, an extension of his own royal authority. It was a weapon for a king, a tool for delivering precise, inescapable judgment. Then he turned his gaze to Draupnir, the golden ring from Brokkr and Sindri. He did not need to be told of its power. He could feel the cyclical, generative magic pulsing within it, a source of infinite wealth. With this ring, he could fund armies, build impregnable fortresses, and buy the loyalty of any being in the 9 worlds. It was a treasure of empire, of long-term, unassailable power. Then there was Thor, the god of thunder, was a being of singular purpose. He gave a respectful nod to the golden hair that now adorned his wife's head, his heart eased by the restoration of her honor. He acknowledged the genius of the other treasures, but his soul was captivated by only one. He stood before Mjölnir, the crude, short-handled hammer. He did not need to touch it again. He could feel its call across the hall, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in his very bones. It was a captive storm, a condensed fury that mirrored his own spirit. It was a weapon of brutal, uncomplicated, and absolute power. It spoke his language. The silent inspection concluded, and the time for spoken judgment had arrived. "The works presented today are the finest the 9 worlds have ever seen," Odin began, his voice a deep resonance that filled the hall. The sons of Ivaldi have forged treasures of supreme elegance and utility. Sif's hair restores beauty and honor, a gift of peace. Skidbladnir offers boundless freedom, a gift of prosperity. Gungnir is an extension of royal will, a gift of authority. Freya spoke next, his voice melodic and warm. I agree, All-Father, the artistry is undeniable. And Gullinbursti, from the forge of Brokkr and Sindri, is a creature of magnificent life. These are gifts that enrich our lives, that bring light and joy. A low rumble of thunder sounded in the hall as Thor shifted in his throne. He leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on his knees, his eyes burning with an intense fire. Light and joy are worthy things, he growled, his voice a stark contrast to Freya's. But they are luxuries we cannot always afford. Asgard is an island of order in a sea of chaos. We are at war, we have always been at war. The frost giants of Jotunheim hate the very light of our realm. They seek to extinguish our fires, to pull down our walls, to return all of creation to the cold, mindless winter from which it was born. He gestured to the treasures of the Ivaldi. Will this beautiful hair stop a giant's club? Will this fine ship protect our borders? Will this elegant spear hold back a legion of our enemies? They are wonders, yes, but they are wonders for an age of peace. His gaze then shifted to the other treasures, to the works of Brokkr and Sindri. This boar, he said, nodding to Gullinbursti, is a warrior's mount, swift and fearless. This ring, he gestured to Draupnir, can pay for the swords and shields of our armies. These are treasures for a world at war. Finally, his eyes came to rest on the hammer, Mjölnir. But this, he said, his voice dropping to a low, reverent whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout, is the war itself. He stood, his immense frame radiating power. The giants are a constant, existential threat. They are a winter that is always coming. We cannot meet them with art or wealth or convenience. We must meet them with a force that is absolute. We must meet them with a storm that will break them. Mjölnir is that storm. It will never miss. It will always return. It is a weapon that says to our enemies, there is no escape. It is the final, undeniable answer to the threat of chaos. He looked at Odin, his eyes pleading. Father, this is not just a weapon for me. It is a shield for all of Asgard. It is the greatest defense we could ever possess. The hall was utterly silent. Thor's words hung in the air, a stark and brutal truth that no one could deny. The gods, in their golden halls, often forgot the fragility of their existence, the constant pressure of the forces of chaos that pressed in on their realm. Thor had reminded them. Odin, the All-Father, looked at his son. He, more than anyone, knew the truth of Thor's words. He had seen the prophecies. He knew the shape of the coming darkness, of the Fimbulwinter, of the final, terrible battle of Ragnarok. Asgard needed a protector, a champion armed with a weapon of ultimate power. The decision was clear. The needs of survival outweighed all other considerations. Odin rose to his full height, his presence filling the hall. The arguments have been made. The treasures have been weighed, he declared, his voice ringing with the finality of a death sentence. The gods have reached a verdict. He paused, letting the tension build to an almost unbearable peak. Loki stood frozen, his face a pale mask of terror. Brokkr watched him, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. The works of the sons of Ivaldi are masterpieces, Odin stated, but the works of Brokkr and Sindri are necessities. In a world besieged by chaos, defense is the greatest treasure of all. He pointed a single, commanding finger at the short-handled hammer. Mjölnir is the greatest of these treasures. It will be the bane of the giants and the protector of our realm. The wager is decided. Brokkr and Sindri are the victors. The verdict landed with the force of a physical blow. A triumphant roar erupted from Brokkr, a sound of pure, vindicated fury that echoed through the hall. He had won. He had endured the trickster's torment, and he had been proven right. Loki stared, his mind refusing to process what he had just heard. It was impossible. He, the god of cleverness, the master of words and schemes, had been defeated. His intricate plan, his arrogant gamble, had collapsed into ruin. He looked at the faces of the gods, at Odin's grim finality, at Thor's savage grin as he lifted Mjölnir, at Freya's reluctant nod of agreement. There was no appeal. There was no escape. He saw Brokkr turn to him, the dwarf's single eye blazing with a hateful, joyous fire. He saw the dwarf draw a long, wicked-looking knife from his belt. He felt a cold, numbing terror unlike anything he had ever known. The game was over. The jest had run its course. And the price, wagered in a moment of supreme arrogance, was now due. His head. Loki stood frozen, the blood draining from his face, leaving him a pale, spectral figure in the warm light of the hall. His mind, usually a dizzying kaleidoscope of schemes and silver-tongued escapes, went utterly blank. He had lost. The intricate web of arrogance and deceit he had so carefully woven had collapsed, and he was now trapped in its ruins. He saw the cold finality in Odin's eye, the grim satisfaction on Thor's face, and the predatory joy blazing in the one good eye of the dwarf advancing on him. Brokkr was no longer just a craftsman. He was a creditor coming to collect a debt sworn by sacred oath. He drew a long, wicked-looking knife from his belt, its edge glinting in the firelight. It was an awl, a tool of his trade, thick and sharp, designed for punching through the toughest of hides. Now, it would be used for a different purpose. "The wager is won," Brocker growled, his voice a low rumble of pure hatred. He stalked towards Loki, the awl held ready. "Your head is mine, trickster." Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through his shock. Loki's mind, the most formidable weapon in his arsenal, began to work with a frantic, desperate speed. He had no strength to match the dwarf, no magic that could defy the judgment of the gods. He had only his wits, his silver tongue, and the treacherous nuances of language. "Wait," Loki cried out, his voice a full octave higher than usual. He took a step back, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. Brocker paused, a cruel smile playing on his lips, enjoying the god's terror. "There is no waiting," the dwarf snarled. "The gods have spoken. Your head is forfeit." "Indeed, indeed," Loki said quickly, his mind racing, searching for a loophole, a crack in the seemingly ironclad agreement. "I wagered my head, that is true. And you have won it, fair and square. My head is yours, come and take it." He gestured to his own head with a flourish that was pure, desperate theatre. Brocker, confused but eager, took another step forward, raising the awl. "However," Loki continued, his voice suddenly becoming sharp and precise, like a lawyer presenting his case, "let us be clear on the terms of our agreement. We must be precise. The wager, as I recall it, was for my head. My head and nothing more. I made no mention of my neck, did I?" A confused murmur rippled through the assembled gods. Brocker stopped, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What nonsense is this?" he growled. "It is not nonsense, it is semantics," Loki said, his confidence beginning to return as he saw his argument taking shape. "It is the very foundation of all oaths and contracts. The words are what matter. I wagered my head, I freely give it to you, but the wager did not include my neck. Therefore you may take my head, but you must do so without cutting, touching, or otherwise harming my neck in any way, for my neck was not part of the bargain." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the argument stunned the hall into silence. The gods looked at each other, then at Odin. Loki had found a loophole. It was a ridiculous, infuriating, and utterly brilliant piece of sophistry. He was adhering to the letter of the law while completely violating its spirit. It was, in short, a perfect Loki argument. Brocker stood dumbfounded, his mind, accustomed to the straightforward logic of metal and fire, unable to process the slippery, infuriating logic of the trickster. He looked to Odin for guidance, his face a mask of frustrated rage. Odin, the All-Father, who appreciated cleverness in all its forms, let a rare, thin smile touch his lips. He stroked his long, grey beard in thought. "The words of an oath are binding," he declared, his voice resonating with authority. "And Loki's point, while infuriatingly technical, is valid. The neck was not mentioned in the wager. You may have his head, Brocker, but you may not harm his neck to take it." The other gods, appreciating the clever escape, began to laugh. Thor, who had been looking forward to seeing Loki humbled, let out a booming laugh of his own, shaking his head at the trickster's unkillable audacity. The tension in the hall broke, replaced by a wave of grudging admiration and amusement. Loki, seeing that he had won his life, could not resist a triumphant smirk. He had done it. He had stared death in the face and had talked his way out of it. But Brocker was not laughing. His face was a thundercloud of pure impotent rage. He had been cheated. He had won the contest, endured the pain, and yet his prize, the head of his tormentor, was being denied him by a clever turn of phrase. He looked at Loki's smirking, arrogant face, at the mouth that had uttered the taunts and the lies that had led to this farce, and a new, colder form of vengeance took root in his heart. If he could not take Loki's head, he would take something else. He would take his voice. "Very well," Brocker snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "He keeps his head. The gods have spoken. But his mouth is another matter. That lying, boastful mouth is what caused all this trouble. He used it to cheat and to mock. If I cannot silence him permanently, then I will silence him temporarily." He turned to Odin. "All-Father, I was promised a prize. If I cannot have his head, then I demand a different satisfaction. Let me sew his lying lips shut, so that he may learn a lesson about the consequences of his words." Loki's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of genuine horror. The laughter in the hall died down. This was a brutal, cruel, and deeply humiliating punishment. It was a punishment that fit the crime perfectly. Odin considered the request. It was harsh, but it was just. Loki's unchecked tongue was a constant source of strife in Asgard. A period of forced silence might do him some good, and it would satisfy the dwarf's need for vengeance, preserving the peace. "The dwarf's request is a fitting one," Odin declared. "Loki, you have saved your life with your clever words. Now you will pay the price for them. The punishment is approved." Loki tried to protest, to argue, to find another loophole, but it was too late. Two of Thor's massive companions seized him, holding him fast. Loki struggled, but their grips were like iron bands. He was helpless. Brokkr advanced on him, the cruel awl once again in his hand. The dwarf's face was a mask of grim satisfaction. He also produced a tough leather thong, a strip of hide that was used to bind axe heads to their hafts. The gods watched in silence, their earlier amusement replaced by a grim fascination. Brokkr, with a practiced, steady hand, grabbed Loki's chin, forcing his mouth shut. Then, with a series of quick, powerful thrusts, he used the sharp point of the awl to punch holes through Loki's upper and lower lips. Loki screamed, but the sound was a muffled, agonized cry, his mouth held fast. Tears of pain and fury streamed down his face. Then Brokkr took the leather thong and began to thread it through the bloody holes, pulling the stitches tight. It was a crude, brutal, and agonizingly slow process. He stitched Loki's lips together, from one corner of his mouth to the other, with a series of thick, strong leather stitches. When he was finished, he tied the knot with a vicious final tug. Loki's mouth was sealed. The source of his power, his silver tongue, was silenced. He was left with only the ability to make muffled, frustrated moans. Blood trickled down his chin, a stark, red line against his pale skin. Brokkr stepped back to admire his handiwork. He had not gotten the head, but he had gotten his revenge. He had silenced the trickster. He had punished the boastful mouth that had caused him so much pain and had nearly cost him his honor. He gave Loki a final, contemptuous look, then turned and without another word strode out of the great hall, his head held high. Loki was released. He stood in the center of the hall, his lips grotesquely stitched together, his face a mask of agony, humiliation, and impotent rage. The gods looked at him, their expressions a mixture of pity, grim satisfaction, and a small measure of fear. They had seen once again the destructive power of Loki's mischief, and they had seen the terrible price that was sometimes required to contain it. The god of mischief, for the first time in a very long time, was utterly, completely, and painfully silent. As the spectacle concluded and everyone started leaving, Thor marveled at Mjölnir. The great hall of Gladsheim slowly emptied, the gods and goddesses departing in a murmur of conversation, their minds still reeling from the contest they had just witnessed. But Thor remained. He stood in the center of the vast, now empty hall, oblivious to the departing crowds. His world had narrowed to the single object in his hand. Mjölnir. He had his iron gauntlets Jarngripr, which allowed him to grasp and crush his enemies, and his belt of strength Mjölnir, which doubled his already immense power. He was the strongest of the gods, a being of pure physical might. But he had always lacked a true weapon, a tool that could not just match his strength, but amplify and channel it. Now he had one. He gave the hammer a slow, experimental swing. The air itself seemed to part before it, a low hum vibrating through the hall. He swung it again, faster this time, and the hum became a roar, the sound of a rising gale. He put his strength into it, a full, powerful swing, and the hammer shrieked through the air with a sound like the sky tearing apart. A bolt of raw lightning, born not from the hammer but from Thor's own being, leaped from the head of Mjölnir, arced across the hall, and struck one of the great silver pillars, leaving a blackened, smoking crater in its wake. Thor stared, his heart pounding with a fierce, exultant joy. The legacy of Mjölnir was forged in that moment. It became more than just a weapon. It became an extension of Thor himself, an iconic symbol of his power and his purpose. He was Thor, the Thunderer, and Mjölnir was his thunder. In the sagas and stories that would be told for millennia, the two would be inseparable. With Mjölnir in his hand, Thor became the unyielding guardian of Asgard, the eternal bulwark against the forces of chaos that sought to destroy the realms of gods and men. In countless battles, he would wield it with devastating effect. He would shatter the skulls of frost giants, crush the gates of their mountain fortresses, and turn back their invading armies. The sound of Mjölnir crashing against its targets would be the thunder that echoed through the 9 worlds, a constant, terrifying reminder to the enemies of Asgard that there was a force of nature sworn to their destruction. But the hammer's legacy was more complex than that of a simple tool of war. It was also a symbol of life, of blessing, and of consecration. In an age where life was precarious, where the line between order and chaos was thin, Mjölnir represented the protective power that kept the darkness at bay. Its image was used to bless marriages, with the hammer being laid in the bride's lap to ensure fertility and ward off evil spirits. It was used to hallow land, to consecrate newborns, and to protect the community from all manner of misfortunes. The hammer that brought death to the giants also brought life and security to humanity. This duality was captured in its very name, Mjölnir, the etymology of which is disputed but holds fascinating possibilities. Some scholars connect it to the Slavic word for lightning, rendering its meaning as lightning maker. Others connect it to the Old Norse word for to grind or to crush, emphasizing its destructive power. And yet another theory connects it to the word for new snow, linking it to a bright, shining, and pure light. It was all of these things: the lightning, the crusher, and the shining light of protection. And so, the legacy of Mjölnir, a legacy that began in a moment of malicious mischief, endured. It became one of the most powerful and recognizable symbols in all of mythology, a testament to the skill of its creators and the strength of the god who wielded it. Thank you for watching or listening in, and I hope you have enjoyed this tale as much as I have enjoyed telling it. This journey into the heart of the dwarven forges and the halls of Asgard is a testament to the richness of these myths. If you love Thor, then you know that his story is one of strength, of duty, and of the eternal struggle to protect the realms of order. Mjölnir is the ultimate symbol of that fight. I hope you have a good day or a good night wherever you are, and I do hope you join me again in the next video, where we will delve into another timeless story from the vast and wondrous tapestry of mythology.